Hello. Is the Count here?
Yes.
Oh, I cannot see you in the darkness.
Come closer, Linde.
What is your name?
Count Quizon. I hear you're here to talk about my podcast recording.
Yes, you wanted to rent the space to record your podcast.
Yes, the podcast that is called Nothing New, a remake podcast. Hello, welcome. It's 2025. New year, new scares. Hello, I am your co-host, Justin Quizon. With me, as always, is...
Hi, I'm Andrew Linde.
We are starting off the year spooky because at the end of 2024, on Christmas Day, and technically speaking, it's because one of these movies does take place during Christmas. I'll count it as a holiday film.
Yeah.
We are talking about the great, famous, classic movie horror character, one of the classic great movie horror characters of all time, the famous vampire. No, not that one. Though his estate is very mad about this movie. We are, of course, talking about Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, 1922.
And Nosferatu 2024.
Almost, wow, like a little over
This is
100
our,
years.
I think without a doubt, this is the oldest remake.
Yes.
The oldest one that we're covering.
Yes. Yes.
I've been excited for this for a while,
Yeah.
just because of honestly, firstly because of that fact.
Mhm.
A lot of remakes that we cover, it's 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah.
Some are only a few years, and that's never interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always a little weird. This, because of such a time jump here, very different film, very different things going on in these films.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm pretty excited for that. Justin, what are your how did you first come to know about Nosferatu, the original?
Like it's funny because I've come to know about him just because, like, when I was younger, I really got into learning about sort of film history. I remember kind of doing a semi like deep dive as best as I could with the libraries and my brother's resources, that like I was starting to gain interest in like older monster movies. So yes, the universal ones like Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, etc. I was always curious about it. Then my brother pointed out the fact that, like, there was a silent Dracula, kind of, as he pointed out. There was kind of a silent Dracula movie in the 1920s. And he showed me, like, pictures of Nosferatu, of Count Orlok. And I, like, went, that is not the same guy. Like, that's not the same guy that I saw in the Universal Studios movie. And he's like, yeah, I don't know where they dug this dude up, but that is a very different take. But essentially, it's the same story. So I got a little bit of a film history from my brother, and pop culture has shown me clips throughout the years, But this is in fact the first time I sat through.
Wow.
From beginning to end. Of Nosferatu. So I was actually really excited about this episode.
That's really interesting. So the version that you watched.
Yes.
So talking about Nosferatu, it's been in the public domain for a little while.
A little while, yeah.
And one of the other things about it is people have put out their own versions. There's like some people stick to the very classic music style, because that's the thing, it is a silent film.
Yes.
So part of when a silent film gets released, you can update the music. Well, some people update it too much.
I agree.
Which did you watch a version with very updated music, or do you know?
Yes.
Which version?
I know which version I watched. And I'm kind of, I'll backtrack a little bit if I can find the YouTube channel.
Yeah, because I did start on YouTube. Like if you have YouTube Premium, you get movies with no commercials or whatever.
Yeah.
So I had that, and I started that version, and I heavily disliked it. The music was way too modern.
Yeah.
With like vocalists, and I just was like, no, this is not going to work for me. So I did just on YouTube regular, like someone just uploaded
the original,
an older version that had more classic music going with it.
So what do you remember? What like maybe the channel or anything like that? Do you have any idea of? Or
no, I could go
was
look.
Do you also know like is it fully black and white or was there tinted?
Oh, no, it was. Oh, it was. There was tint to it.
Like sometimes it was green, sometimes it was yellow.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason this is where it gets a little complicated. Yes, for the listener. Yes, it's on public domain, and yes, you can technically watch a black and white silent version, depending on the music. Is like Andrew's first experience could be very modern or could be more classic.
Well, and that one even had they had new title cards with this modern music, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be feeling that. Like,
yeah. So,
I want those old, scratchy looking title cards.
The version I watch is on a YouTube account called Alternate Reality, and it is done, I believe, through the Murnau estate in Germany. I'm not 100% sure, but it is in fact there's like a huge blocks of text in the beginning of the video of the film that explains that this is as best as they can a recreation of not only the footage to as best as they could to up-res it, but also to recreate the title cards in the original font, original text style, and music as close to the original as they probably played. And, granted, if you actually know a little bit about the silent movie history, there is music set that is like a set sort of music depending on the film. Also, though, it's not consistent if you go to theaters. Yes. There's plenty of stories of hearing about sometimes the performer who's playing the music while the movie's playing goes by feel, and they kind of change a little bit. But whatever this version is, an alternate reality, is about, as they said, as close as we could get. So it was interesting to see German text, but then in the bottom, English subtitles.
Oh, okay.
But, it's a silent film, so it's not particularly hard to really do.
Yeah.
But yes, that's the version I saw with apparently the tinted colored of scenes. Those were Murnau's intentions.
Yeah.
So if you see a purely black and white version, no, and don't get me wrong, that's still a cool way of looking at it, but that is also not 100% what Murnau intended to do. He wanted there to be tint on various scenes here and there. So if you are curious to watch that version, it is on a YouTube account called Alternate Reality. It is all there. You have to sit through ads. That's okay.
So when I originally saw Nosferatu, it was years ago. I think it was when I started going to college. I took a film class, and they were showing us different films through the early filmmaking days, and it included a Buster Keaton, this. But then, of course, there was the German Expressionism era, which they showed us the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right, which I still I should rewatch that because I'm sure I'll see a lot more now than I did then when I was just figuring out oh, what is this? What's going on here? And so in that, but I remember at that time I was like, well, I also wanted to watch other things of that. So Nosferatu is another German Expressionism film. It has the heightened look and all that. So that's when I watched Nosferatu around that time, and I hadn't revisited it in all these years, but I always remembered loving it and the look of the character and all of that, even though he's not exactly Dracula. It's one of those funny things where I think looking at the history of it, we shouldn't be able to see Nosferatu right now.
Right.
The original. It was court ordered to be destroyed. And it didn't come back until the 70s or something. Someone found a print and was like, oh, we still have it. I don't know. I don't know the whole story there, but it's so crazy to me when so many movies are lost.
Yeah.
like of those early through the 20s and 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm.
There are movies that are just like, oh yeah, we know they existed, but no prince survived.
Imagine if that's the case, right? Like there was no prince that survived, and then like, but clearly still exist.
Yeah.
Imagine like I would be that movie obsessive that would look at these early stills of Orlok and be obsessed with that movie.
Yeah.
It's like, I need to see this. I need to see this German version of Dracula where they don't even call him Dracula, but he looks like this. Yeah. I would be obsessed with that movie. Thankfully, I can watch apparently multiple versions of this movie.
But yeah, it's and I think when they made it, you know, obviously at that time it was like that movie was for German audiences.
Yeah.
Like it was made, you know, in German by German. Like it's so weird that it was so specific.
Yeah.
And now we can watch it worldwide. And like you said, you even had the German title cards, but with English subtitles at the bottom. Like that is so extreme. And yet it's like that's so cool that film could survive that.
Yeah.
Like even the someone trying to recreate it as close to the original as possible. It's like they're like, yeah, this is worthwhile to do. And it's like, yeah, that really is. That's really cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, like this is a whole subject, but like preserving important media, important story, important films is such a key thing for me. And knowing that like it's so clear the visual impact of Nosferatu is so powerful.
Yeah.
That absolutely it needs to be preserved. Absolutely it needs to be viewed as it should be, because clearly over 100 years later, the visuals of that film still resonate. You know, whether it's to, you know, like recreate the horrific vibes that people saw in the 1920s, or whether it is to you know, maybe poke fun at it a little bit or call homage to it in a funny way. I know there's a generation of folks who know this character, this iteration of character, thanks to SpongeBob.
Yeah.
But also, heck, even in the What We Do in the Shadows movie, favorite surprise character is their roommate Nick, I think, or whatever, who he's just a Nosferatu. I call him, he's a Nosferatu.
Yeah.
He's not Orlok. He's just their roommate who's I call a Nosferatu, and he stays in the dungeon. He lives in the coffin, but he looks just like Count Orlok.
Yep.
And yeah, it's striking stuff that needs to be preserved as best as possible, to that you can sort of see, you know, like the film has to always begin somewhere, especially horror as a genre, and like I feel it's very important that, yeah, I'm glad there's a version out there that's like, this is basically as close as we can to what the audience in Germany saw in the 1920s, and that's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, this is I mean, I feel like normally we'd go through the cast, and this is one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, nobody knows, like, it's not really going to have the same impact, but I do think the one we could talk about the guy who played Count Orlok,
Of course.
Because I think just because he played Count Orlok, his name is more remembered and referenced.
Mm-hmm.
Count Orlok was played by a guy named Max Schreck.
Yes.
And yeah, it's not spelled the same as the green ogre who lives in a swamp.
Right.
But I can't help but wonder if it influenced that.
I can't help but think that either. It's very close. And if you're a Batman Returns fan, Christopher Walken's famous billionaire capitalist character is named Max Schreck. You know. Also, side note, that is my first exposure to Christopher Walken.
Wow.
Was Batman Returns.
Wow.
I just remember watching that movie going like, what is up with this dude? You know, Batman.
What? Someone shared the GIF or whatever where isn't it him and it's right at the end. He's like, why is Bruce Wayne wearing a Batman costume?
That's so good.
It's like, that is so good because he's so
good.
stupid.
But it also kind of proves sign is a side thing, but it also kind of proves my favorite thing about like, people think they're smarter than they are. He's like, why don't you? It's like, yes, because in actual reality, when confronted with the actual truth that Batman is Bruce Wayne, your brain can't compute that concept. So you're thinking, well, clearly Bruce Wayne's not Batman. It almost strengthens the Clark Kent to Superman thing.
Yeah.
So, whenever people are like, oh, superhero identities are unrealistic. No, people are stupid. There, I'll say it. Specifically rich people like Max Schreck. Side note also, I also love that his son in the movie also has adopted his accent. So he's like, Dad, I'll protect you. No, son, he wants me. Anyway.
That is so wild. So, okay. And then,
but let's talk about Shrek.
Yeah, Max Shrek. I mean, he's great. I mean, and he's got the look of Nosferatu.
Yeah,
is what makes him go on in our minds, in our memories.
Right.
He's got this just bizarre, he's incredibly pale, incredibly tall, long pointy fingers, big like pointed bat ears almost.
Yeah.
Like it kind of looks like a bat, but it's like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why does this guy look like this? I don't know, but he's like terrifying to look at.
And especially when you put him through like the look of a 1920s film, where it's just the beginnings of film, the beginnings of how we capture light in film. It's horrifying. To this day, it's still very creepy. If there was no evidence of this being a movie, and you just showed this photo to somebody, have you seen this photo of the 1920s? Someone's going to be like, what the fuck is that? And that's like, I have no idea. He looks horrific. Is he a diseased man? Is he... What's wrong with him?
I think, parts of him live on in different monsters and different stories.
Yeah.
Like the hands with the long fingers and fingernails is like, that's a witch. Like a witch hand. Like that's what we think of.
Yeah.
Like his face is used in like, look at the orcs in orcs? No.
In Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings, yeah. Look at them. Like their facial features are like Count Orlok's. Like there are things that like even if you're like, well, I don't care about that. That's an old movie from the whatever. It has influenced things that go far beyond horror and are just like everywhere. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah, Max Schreck.
Max Schreck.
We can talk about I think we can talk a little bit about the characters and how they relate to Dracula.
Yes.
Because it isn't a one-to-one, but it's close enough that it's like, well, yeah, this is.
But it's clearly. Yeah. There are you're that character.
Yeah.
Especially if you're very familiar with the Dracula story. Yes, Thomas Hutter. By all accounts, he's John Harker. Easily, very clearly. And then, of course, Mina's equivalent from Dracula is Ellen. Let's see. I know specifically. Knock. Now, here's the thing. Knock was one where I had to kind of double check.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at how Knock was written in the beginning of the movie, and I was like, is that? No, that doesn't make any. Because isn't that character? Well, hold on. Let me keep watching. And then. Yes, as I suspected, Knock is essentially Renfield, but a very different interpretation of the character in the beginning. But then eventually he's like, "Oh no, there you are."
Yeah.
And then there's Professor Bueller, who is he is kind of basically he is the Van Helsing, but I will admit, not doing as much as a traditional Van Helsing. But he's definitely there to do Mr. Exposition and kind of explain and etc. But he doesn't get to do nearly anything cool like the Van Helsings later in their career.
It's very funny because I had watched a local playhouse do their production of Dracula last year.
Yeah.
And so I had like that in my mind too. I have like all these different versions of like and I'm thinking about like, yes, the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula, like all of them. And I'm like, wow, that's like, you can go a lot of different directions, but you do have like the basic parts are like, you have a guy who's either in love or married. She is being pursued by Dracula. You have a doctor who kind of knows about Dracula. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of he knows about the vampire.
Right.
All of these parts are kind of always there floating around, and it's funny to see like Nosferatu's like almost like it's weirdly like an original remake. You know what I mean? Like it is very much like they took Dracula. They were like, okay, you can't use Dracula, and they were like, okay, we're just gonna change it a little. we're gonna do little changes here. And it's like, oh, okay. The courts decided that wasn't enough.
Yeah. Let's be clear, it wasn't. As somebody who is fairly familiar with the Dracula story, I was like, you did. It's like what they did is like they tried to like restructure or a little bit of it. So a great example is that like the Dementor, the ship that like brought Dracula to England. If you watch most other iterations, what beginning of Act 2, that's where that happens. End of Act 1, the events of the ship where people are like, oh my god, look at all these dead bodies.
Yeah.
That's almost near the end of Act 2, maybe at the beginning of Act 3 in Nosferatu.
Yeah.
And there's a big extended sequence on the ship that's not usually in the other adaptations of that moment in the book.
And part of it does, the idea here is that, yes, Nosferatu cannot interact with people. Like, he looks so, like, different, so monstrous just on his face that if a person meets him, it's like, oh, something's wrong. Like, that they can't get, the Dracula that we know from Universal and just from every other iteration is like, he looks like the most handsome man you ever met. He's incredibly suave. He can talk his way out of things. Like it's not even just his mind control. Like he's he's like, everything's fine. I'm going now. Like it's like, okay, sure. But this man is like you're comparing him to a Universal monster or even to just a monster. And he does. They want, it's like on his face. You look at this guy and you go, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Something is wrong.
Right. Yeah. Right. 100%.
So every scene where he would normally be talking to someone, it either has to be he's hidden away or that person is just in so much danger that it's like, well, that's it for them.
Right. There's because it's silent film.
Yes.
There are a lot of things that we just sort of have to accept in the narrative. Does that make sense? Like, it's not huge leaps to understand, but we just have to kind of go, oh, okay, that's where we're at in the story. A lot of it is, and I put a pin on it, explaining Ellen's draw to Orlok. There are no real hardcore ways of explaining outside of Orlok having an obsession with Ellen.
Yeah, there is, the way it's shown, there's like, what, he sees the necklace.
Yes.
The locket with a picture of Ellen. But then when there's like a scene where where Orlok is going to attack, like he's coming through that's the doorway scene.
Yeah.
Which is like visually incredibly famous.
Yes.
And even watching it now, I'm like, yeah, this is like, it's like what they're putting on film is what some people describe as their night terrors. Like it's night, you look through your open dark doorway and something is coming towards you very slowly, very deliberately. And it's like, oh no, and I can't move. Like that's very real.
Yeah.
And he is stopped by like, it's like Ellen has like this psychic connection. It's very like visually it's shown as like we cut to Ellen and then it's like the two scenes are happening like on top of each other.
Yes.
And somehow she repels Orlok or he realizes that he can get to her through him. And it's like, well, I can't kill him now. Like and I'm like, that's so interesting that's just in this. Yeah. And they, like you said, it's a leap. Like there's no setup to it. There's no understanding of what exactly that means. It's just like, oh, right. Something happens and he realizes, oh, I can get to Ellen. I just need to wait. Yeah. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating, but you buy it.
Yeah.
You do go, okay, movie, I'm going to be with you on that. And I feel like that's the magic trick sometimes when we talk about doing stories in movies, is that you just got to be compelling. You don't have to explain everything. If you over-explain things, you ruin it, or you get bogged down to it. Sometimes it's just enough to go, oh, I get it.
Now, there are things in this movie, the 1922 film, that may be a little over-explained. Like when Hutter finds the little book of vampire lore. So the story is, Hutter is told by his employer, Knock, to go make the real estate deal at the castle of Count Orlok. And while he's going there, he has to stop at an inn, and Hutter stays the night, but all the people at the inn are superstitious. They are like, we're scared of werewolves. And like, they show a wolf outside the door. The wolf was like a painted animal, right? Like, it wasn't a real wolf. It was really strange. It was like I don't know if it was a dog or some kind of a cheetah. Like, it was some kind of animal that was not a wolf. But they gave it like a weird color pattern. And he's like, okay, whatever, this town's weird. And then he finds the book on vampires. And Hutter reads it, not taking it seriously, but that's how they're conveying to us, the audience, things about vampires. And it also like plays in later where that's where Ellen reads the book and is like, right, vampires. I understand now. It's very like, okay, that was a bit heavy-handed. Whatever.
It's also where it's like, I sort of mildly forgive the heavy-handedness because we are talking about a movie from the 1920s that has no audio. So I understand it's like they go, read that. No, here's the page. Literally read it. And it's like, okay, one more time. I got it. Because we don't know when we got it. I'll give them that sort of benefit of the doubt. Is that like, 100 years later, we as an audience member and filmmakers can probably go, oh, they probably get it by now. Whereas back in 1921, they were like, fuck if I know. Where now it's like, oh, just show them the page again. We just need to make it super clear. This is a vampire, which we got it. He is definitely a vampire.
Oh, a thing that I was thinking about, it starts with, text on the screen, but it is like in the style of like a letter or a journal entry.
Yeah.
And I was realizing, maybe I missed it. Are we supposed to know who's writing that?
I didn't catch that either.
Yeah. So. And I thought it was very, maybe vague enough that, it just moves the story forward. And I haven't read the book Dracula, whatever, but I had heard that a lot of the parts of that book are in the form of letters. So I kind of wonder if that was their tribute to that. Like, oh yes, we have to do a letter style, but then they're like, well, we have to tell the story.
Right.
But even that narration starts with like, obviously they're like Nosferatu. Ooh, it's a spooky word. Like, that's the way it starts. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you got to kind of explain it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I'm going to tell you the story of how the plague came to Weisberg, like the city. And I'm like, okay, that's a cool way in.
Yeah.
To kind of explain like what's going on with everything. Like why it's not just like, oh, I'm going to tell you about a vampire. It's like, no. This town that I lived in or cared about had the plague. How did it get there? It's like, well, it came from a vampire. Like, it's kind of like a cool way into the story.
A side note, there's not a ton of information if this is something that inspired the making of this iteration of the movie. But I do want to point out that the movie came out in 1922. In 1918 to 1920, that was when the flu pandemic happened.
Right, yeah.
A lot of that sounded very familiar if you lived in 2020. If you're paying attention in 2020, but that kind of caught my attention a little bit when I realized this is a movie made a year or two after that pandemic.
Yeah.
And imagery that I'm sure hit harder for folks in the 1920s. Seeing caskets being brought down, hospitals being hearing about hospitals being filled, must have felt more impactful because you just saw that happened.
Yeah.
And again, this movie takes place in its own past.
It's like 1830 something.
Exactly. So, but even then, within that filter of that, it is a reminder of like, right, sometimes as we currently talk, history repeats itself.
Yeah.
And there that might have added to the sort of dread of watching this movie, because their imagery is repeating stuff that's happened to people.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating to think that Eggers, who, we'll talk about Eggers' film later, but it is interesting to kind of note that, while this is not the motivation for Eggers' remake, it does come out 4 years after the start of a horrible pandemic.
Mm.
So it's eerie in that regard.
Yeah.
That tie, that connection.
Mm.
But I feel like that element is definitely, because that is something that the world was living in. Those elements got harder explained in this adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the boat, people were saying, "Oh, look at those! My men are dying of the flu, of the disease."
Yeah.
Which we're like, no, that's not why they're dying. But I get why you think that's the case.
It's a good cover for if you're a vampire.
Yeah. He's like, what? No, that's not to me. It was clearly. I am but a humble passenger.
I'll go sleep in my box.
That is a normal box.
Now, okay, we are doing the voice that we're doing.
We're so not really doing.
It's like it was a silent movie. Like there was no voice.
There's
to
a
this.
voice.
We're not even doing the scars.
We're not even doing
Eggers version.
I tried to do a little bit of in the beginning.
Yeah.
But if you, maybe early hint, if you listen to our Patreon, you know who I'm doing.
Yeah. It's funny how I think we're putting a voice on this specific version.
Yeah.
But I do 22 versions. It's like, well, you never spoke. We
don't even know.
We don't know. Okay, and there's some general stuff that I remember visually liking about this movie,
mm-hmm.
but and maybe I don't like it for the reason that it wants me to like it. But
okay.
Given how Nosferatu looks, anytime that he has to interact with the world, I really enjoy, because I even like when he's running around with his coffin.
Yeah, me too.
People make fun of that scene because it does look silly,
mm-hmm.
but I'm like, yeah, what else would he do? Like, he has to pick up his coffin and go. Like, I liked when he was they have it in there where he is the carriage driver that brings Hutter to the castle.
Yeah,
I absolutely love that, because he's trying to disguise himself, which is he puts on like a big scarf and a hat.
Yeah.
And then even in the castle, he's wearing like a hat, which is kind of hiding some of his look.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's like another thing about Count Orlok is his like teeth. He has these like very prominent
rat
teeth. Yeah. It's like, what is the deal with this guy?
Yeah.
And I think it's like kind of, now that I've read too much about all of it, so I'm like, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I'm remembering things that weren't there. But there is like a mention of like, specifically Count Orlok gets his powers from like demonic
mm-hmm.
stuff. It's like related to demons. So it's like, this is not vampire lore as we understand it today.
Mm-hmm.
Because already it's like between like Blade and Underworld, there's so many random, and then like Twilight, like there's so many random ass things that are like brought into vampire lore.
Yeah.
Like, this is like we're going back to the source.
Yeah.
And this is like the first divergence from the source.
You know what? It's funny. This is somewhat close to when we talked about Treasure Island.
Yes.
In the fact that even though we may always assume that like how we view certain pop culture things has been the way it is, you don't quite realize like what actually started what we all think is a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we pointed out with Treasure Island, it really was that movie that made us, whenever we say pirates, go, "Arr, yardy matey, blah 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 blah." Yeah, because it's Treasure Island, that movie specifically. And while there's not one-to-one everything with vampires to this movie to everything else, obviously Bella will add to that very deeply in about a decade.
Yeah.
It starts, a lot of those elements still start from here.
Mm-hmm.
And like it is the birth of all these vampire elements that you're talking about in Orlok, in the way he looks and he's performed. And it's not like Bela Dracula isn't without its own form of creep. And elements that maybe he shares, probably not performance-wise and ripping off-wise, but it's an element that's inherent to the character, what it's named, Orlok or Dracula, that is hard to deny. Like, actually, to jump back into Hutter's first night with Orlok, I love the scene, by the way. It's a scene I really feel the tension. I feel the terror from
when he
Hutter.
cuts his thumb.
Right before he cuts his thumb,
Yeah.
but
leading up to the cutting of the thumb.
It's very tense. Because
that's why the cutting, like, it releases that tension in such a way where you're like, oh God. Like,
and it's a great moment because it's like the actor who plays Hutter, I will give him a little credit here, Gustav von Weigenheim. He plays it correctly. He is looking at this man and going, what are you? The entire time he's there.
Yeah.
And he's doing his best to just like, okay, just act normal. Just act normal. Just act normal. Just act normal. Just eat this meal and then make sure he signs the paperwork and then I can get out of here to my wife. Okay, just act normal. Let's just finish this. And he is so freaked out by him and the tension's so palatable and thick in the silent film that, yeah, you're right. The cutting of his thumb is the release, but also the real first sign of, oh, what the fuck is wrong with this Orlok?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it's like, oh, blood. And Orlok's like,
Yeah, that's rough. That's crazy.
And it's interesting because if you look into the Todd Browning Dracula version of that scene, ironic with Renfield.
Yes.
Same vibes apply, obviously, but except there, that Bela Lugosi is clearly a more normal-looking man and more traditional, handsome man. But Bela understands in that same scene, I have to create this tension and uneasiness. So the way he stares, the way he dotes a little bit to Renfield is echoing the sort of uncomfortableness that Shrek does in his performance. Here, even though he doesn't do the same things, it's like that's the important element of this scene. Is that like it's supposed to look like a very accommodating, I've served you dinner. Let's enjoy your first night here. But the guy who has to do this is sitting there going, I don't like this now.
I think, we keep bringing it up. It's like that is supposed to be Renfield. I do think that is like a smart shortcut that they make where it's like, okay, the guy who is really Renfield, we don't see him go to the castle.
Yes.
Like it's either he never went or he started going insane over letters only. Like through distance and all this, like Orlok was able to persuade this guy and convince him and hypnotize him even through all of that. And it's like, let's just get to the good part. Let's just get to the guy that we care about.
Right.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of a smart little shortcut. Like I do like that move as much as I like Renfield as a character and seeing those moments. It's like, oh yeah, if you're going to update a little, from when the book was written to you're sitting there and you're like, oh, how do I do it a little different? There you go. You cut out that little part. And it's so then Hutter. I did want to talk about, Bulwer.
Oh yeah.
Right. So the scenes that they give him are like he's just being like a little weirdo.
He's being a little weirdo.
He's like he has like a little class of students, and he's like, check this thing out. It's called a Venus flytrap. Whoa. Which I'm like, that's so funny that's like the only scene. And then like, what's the other? It's like some kind of a sea creature that does something. He's got like in a little aquarium tank. But I'm like, oh, this is just mood. Really.
Yeah.
Like they're just this is trying to tell the audience like there are things in nature that are scary and want to kill you. Like that's what I took from like the Venus flytrap scene where it's like there's stuff out there that we don't fully understand because that looks like a plant, but then it eats a fly. Plants don't eat flies.
Right.
It wants the blood. Like they're really trying to like hit on these concepts where it's like nowadays we're like, yeah, get to it. But I think in 1922, like this was a smart way to like build that dark mood and get audiences into like, okay, yeah, this is a guy that drinks blood? Huh. Okay, yeah, sure. Let's see what that looks like. Where does he come from?
Right.
We talked about the Demeter a little bit. I do like that scene as well. The captain is like, well, my men, he's losing his men one by one.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, it's the sickness.
The rats.
The rats coming out of the. I like that he uses the axe on the box and all the rats come out.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And then, they get to. I mean, we could just get to the.
We should get to the
end.
Yeah. Get to the end. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Orlok. So the house that he's buying is like across the way from the Hutters. Yeah. And so, and then he comes for Ellen, but Ellen has now read the vampire book as well.
Yeah.
Which is, like, of course, like I said, it's like a very, shorthand. We have to buy into like, you read this book and go, oh, of course, this book is 100% correct. I need to follow its thing. I think it's a sinless maiden must give her blood to the Nosferatu, to Count Orlok, to destroy him. And it's like she must give it willingly.
Yeah.
And sinless maiden, which is like, I guess at that time, shorthand, she has no kids, that kind of thing. And so there she is, and she has made this weird psychic connection to save her husband. And so she gives herself up to defeat him and save the town from his influence. And she does it. It's
interesting is that what kills Orlok, final kill, is the sun blood, sunlight. And I kind of made the joke while watching it that I'm going like, well, it seems to be walking in the daylight just fine. But I think the ritual of Ellen plus that.
Yes.
But again, even besides the Ellen element, we are talking about adding to the visual film history now of vampires. We definitely always associate sun hitting a vampire is bad for the vampire in general. So this does sort of visually establish, the sun can kill a vampire as well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it was done so very, at the end of the day, simply, but it is very effective visual, and you just see that little kind of leftover of Orlok. There's all these, I want to point out, there's all these some of the greatest visuals do happen in this third act concerning Orlok, and a lot of it is silhouettes.
Yes,
these are the iconic. If there's anything that's the stamp of Nosferatu, it's the silhouettes of Orlok. Those are by far the thing that people remember outside of his look is just the hand shadow just creeping up
the stairway. There's like the stairway shot where it's his full body, but the hands are reaching out above, and beyond him.
Just the shots of his hand over Helen's and then clutching his hand and then Helen reacting as if he has grabbed her heart is one of the most simplest ideas, but it tells you everything. It's creepy till now. And it just is like, that's to me is like, that's smart. That's the smart filmmaking going in before they even, that's we're now building the language of horror while it's starting. And that's kind of incredible to see,
Yeah, it really is. I think, like you're saying, beyond Orlok's look, shadows, playing with shadows, I think that does. I think that is another part of the German expressionism look. I think people are paying tribute to this film, but it appears in several films of this era.
Oh yeah,
like I said, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari does that as well, and it also has kind of an Orlockian figure, if you can use that term.
That's true. Yeah.
A man who is sleepwalking and he rises out of his bed in that similar way that we know. I mean, even that's another visual here that Orlok rises from his grave like feet like straight up on his feet.
Yeah.
And it's like, even to now, even to like modern slashers, they love doing that. Like, there's a reason why Michael Myers getting up the way he does in the original Halloween is so terrifying. Because it's like, that plays on our idea of like vampires. It plays on this idea of like, what is the oldest thing that is scariest? And there it is.
That's
it's like
right.
a guy getting up out of a grave, straight up.
No assistance from his back, just like
It just fully, it's like, I don't know if it's his abs or his calves. Something is just flinging him forward. It's really like, dude, that's scary.
He's like, no.
Yeah. See, I mean, a great film.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you quite got that.
Yeah.
Great movie. It's really good. You should go check it out.
I was very sad to miss another local theater had done a screening of Nosferatu recently with a live accompaniment. Mm-hmm. And I had seen another showing of it was the old silent Zorro.
Oh, okay.
And it was the same accompaniment band, and that was fantastic. Like they had perfectly, like they had scored it themselves. And like the what I remember from that the most is the fight scenes where Zorro's fighting. The drummer is like doing the hits.
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
Like, psh, psh, psh. It's like that is
that's cool.
That's what the idea of the silent accompaniment, like having something playing with it, is to fully evoke like what you're feeling. And I'm like, God, I missed out on their Nosferatu, but I can only imagine it was like perfect. Like it was above and beyond like just playing music. It was like fully fitting the film, and that's, if you can find something like that to go along with this, it's great. Because I still want to talk about a little silent films. There was even like the silent Phantom of the Opera is so iconic, and something that I know that people have done through the years is there have been like modern bands have put their music to it. Like I think even there was even people have done this with Nosferatu, putting modern like albums to it.
Oh, okay.
But very carefully. Like they're not just like, well, we're gonna play what. No, it makes it where it's like, oh yeah, it is fitting the mood, even though the sound is completely removed. Like you're like, yeah, this is like a very modern sound, but it's very done specifically. So I do think, I don't want to say that having modern music on Nosferatu is bad, but I think if you can find, like a classic sounding one, that's the version that you want to watch.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I kind of want to check any of those out, to be honest. That sounds great. It's been a while since I've sat through like a silent movie experience. I know there's a very famous one over here in California. Called in El Segundo that has like they're famous for having a really great like kind of live orchestra. Well, not orchestra,
the organist.
Yeah. And back in the day, I used to go to the silent movie theater in Fairfax in LA. I got to watch some like old Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin stuff there with my brother. So as I'm watching this, going like, man, this will be great. This probably would be great live to see at some point. Okay, that is that for this trip on the So we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and we're gonna come right back around to Transylvania again. And this time, maybe I talk deeper like this small thing. Right after these breaks.
To all who come to this happy podcast, welcome.
Animusings are your musings.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
And here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Kayla.
And if it wasn't readily apparent from that, we're huge nerds about Disney. That's why we're doing the Animusings podcast.
Once a month, we'll sit down and talk about a film in detail from the Walt Disney Animation Studios filmography, covering them in chronological order, from Snow White to Moana and beyond.
To Moana and beyond!
Sweetie, we're not doing Pixar yet. We'll do that after.
And that's gonna be a long time coming. Anyway, if that sounds up your alley, come join Kayla and I, and maybe a guest or two, as we explore the Disney animated canon, film by film.
With the hope that it'll be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world.
Ooh, nicely said.
Don't thank me, thank Walt.
All right. Well, I got us a ride on this ship here, Justin. I think,
Great.
It's called the Demeter.
God damn it! Did you not even listen to us in the first hour of this episode?
Huh? I'm hearing a voice is telling me to come visit him.
Oh no! No!
I think we should go.
No!
And he also sent this this episode of something new, a Patreon exclusive for us to listen to.
Oh, we'll go. Let's listen to that for a
it's
little
from
bit
the
first.
Patreon. We'll give it a listen.
Yeah.
To me, it's like why would you remake Nosferatu?
Mm-hmm.
This is how you
Yes.
address the film
Mm-hmm.
and the history of it, and you still get to recreate the scenes.
Right.
It's like the doing a movie about the making of the movie is going to be more interesting than just doing the movie.
And come on, Andrew, get back over here.
Whoa!
My God, listen, that is bad. But what is good is that for $1 a month, you can get a bonus episode of our show exclusively on the Patreon. The Patreon includes episodes that are only available on the Patreon. We are not putting these shows on the main timeline. And you can get classic Patreon episodes like us talking about pitching our own remake ideas. Last year, we ended with basically a ranking of our favorite remakes that we covered at the end of all of 2024. But also, if you just want to pay $25 for 1 month, you can control the show. At this tier, you'll get to pick a remake and the original film for us to cover, and we will work with you on the film choice and when the episode will be released to the main feed. And you also get, access to the monthly, to the rest of our access, the rest of our month, the rest of our archive in our Patreon. So please join the other members of our Patreon. They are, again, if you're following us and you do pay for it monthly, thank you so much. We appreciate all of you. And without further ado, we are back talking about not Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
But I find this is something I found fascinating about Edgar's wanting to do Nosferatu. Is that there has been another Nosferatu adaptation remake between this, and that is the one done by Werner Herzog.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found fascinating is that one, even though the title is Nosferatu and the visual of the main vampire is definitely inspired by Murnau's film, everyone has their Dracula names.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Jonathan Harker, it's Nina. He's Dracula?
Huh.
I think. But it is titled Nosferatu. I haven't seen it. I was kind of thinking about maybe watching it, but I didn't have the time. But then that kind of got me to thinking, well, why did Eggers want to try again? If you're not familiar with Robert Eggers, Eggers has been a very fascinating filmmaker with a very distinct kind of pedigree and kind of tone of his films.
Yeah.
Watch The Witch, watch Lighthouse, watch even the Northman.
The Northman, yeah.
The Northman, which isn't a scary film, but it is in its own way. So I'm fascinated by the idea that he wanted to do Nosferatu, but I was curious, it's one thing to go, I want to do a Dracula movie. A lot of folks want to do Dracula movies. But I was curious as to why zero in on Nosferatu? What was so fascinating to him about it? And then I found out he was a fan since he was a kid, in so much so that he did a production of Nosferatu in high school that combined elements of Murnau's film and Stoker's novel. So that play adaptation, which FYI he played Orlok on stage.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow.
So very clearly, he's had a fascination with the character of specifically of Orlok. It's funny. I kind of brought up how I learned about him, how I learned about Nosferatu and Orlok.
Yeah.
I found out essentially Edgar's did the same way. Found out the same thing. He too was a young kid big fan of starting to become a fan of horror movies, becoming a fan of the Universal characters, wanted to learn more, and he too saw a photo of Orlok and went, "What the fuck is that?" But unlike me, where I went, "Whoa, that's wild," he went, "I need to see more, and I need to know more about him," and he became obsessed. So, what I find fascinating is that from what I read about Eggers' interest in doing this adaptation, he's wanted to do this for a while. He almost made this. He tried to making this his second film.
Yeah.
Immediately after which, or Vivitch, if you're that person.
And it has like a subtitle. If you're gonna call it the Vitch folklore or something.
Yeah. But he's been trying to make this movie after that, and so he's been wanting to make it for a while. And I kind of find fascinating is that like this sort of echoes another filmmaker who wanted to sort of recreate and remake one of his favorite films of all time, Peter Jackson. Who wanted to remake King Kong. And I find that fascinating because it's not so much that they want to improve. I think what it is that those movies burrowed so deep into their film DNA that they felt like they needed to sort of, this is a very artsy way of putting it out, but they needed to sort of like put their artistic stamp on this thing that is so important to them to get it out of them. And I think with Murnau and Jackson's, they had the benefit of taking a film that is a lot older in the beginnings of film history, 1930s and 1920s, and going, well, good thing there are things we can improve and we can expand and we can add that doesn't necessarily take away from what made this movie special. And so, like, if you listen to our King Kong episode, the biggest one is making, Jack a character. Making him an actual fully dimensional human being.
Yeah.
as one example. So here I was fascinated to see what Murnau, what Edgars was curious about. What can I take from the Murnau narrative, but add, expand, and maybe even fix if there is such thing, but keeping the elements that are so iconic to him in this version.
I mean, that's almost like what we went through with West Side Story as well.
Yes, very true. You're right.
Spielberg had always loved the original West Side Story film, and he always wanted to remake it, but he just was like, I don't know. Like, and then finally he took that leap at it.
Yeah.
And made something amazing. Like,
I love that. I love his West Side Story.
And I think what we're talking about with these filmmakers, where, like you said, they burrowed in their brain. It is something that they saw early on, and it affected them. Is that I think part of what they want to do, they want to show people now what they loved about it then.
Yep.
But it doesn't translate to just watch the movie.
Right.
You need to watch it the way they did.
Right.
Which is to say that their eyes saw something that isn't even there.
Yeah.
That they're bringing out of it. Like they're finding the little nuances. They're saying, well, these two things should have connected anyway. So let's just make that explicit. Like, they're just building out this whole different movie from a movie that they love.
That's such a good way of saying it. Yeah.
And I don't think they're making stuff up. I think they saw it in the film.
Yeah.
These things that they're bringing to their new version, they always saw.
Right.
They always said, well, yes, of course, Ellen and Orlok have a connection. Like with Spielberg, well, yes, of course. What was that character's name? It's like that character wasn't just a tomboy. That was something.
Oh,
more.
Sure.
Like there was always like a deeper element to these characters. And even with King Kong, it was like, well, he's like, I have to do the dinosaurs more. Like, it's like I have to bring more to the,
Yeah. But also, like, it's such a good way. That is a great way of putting it. It's not just. It's like it's not just just watch the original film, because sometimes modern folks who are watching older films, and if they didn't see it at a certain age or a certain point in their life, they won't get what they get. And they love these films so much. They're like, I need to redo it so that you understand why I like it. And with Jackson's film, it's not perfect, but you get what he loved about the 1933 film. With Spielberg and West Side, it's something we talked about with the True Grit.
I was gonna say True Grit was right there too.
And this is my favorite thing that I've discovered about True Grit, that I realized, like, oh, this is a good way of explaining these kind of remakes. Is they're not erasing the original; they are talking to the original. They are having a cinematic discussion with the original movie with their new version of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is, in fact, the greatest reason why, and I understand his intent, but why Gus Van Sant shot-for-shot remake of Psycho does not work. Is that Gus is saying Hitchcock is so genius that even if I just did it shot for shot, but in color, because you people hate black and white, you'll get why Hitchcock is a genius. But the problem is that you're also missing the other elements that make Hitchcock's movie unique, that it doesn't connect the same way. You know, your casting isn't done the same way. The vibes aren't feeling the same thing. You know, I get what you were doing with Vaughn, but since Vaughn is essentially echoing what composition-wise what Perkins was doing, you're missing one of the key things about Psycho. Perkins.
Yeah.
Perkins is a big part of why Psycho works. So you had to have readapted in a way that made the movie yours while talking to it. You know what I mean?
That's one of my favorite things that I learned about the Psycho remake. William H. Macy.
Yeah.
In that scene where he falls down the stairs and he's told, oh yeah, we're going to shoot it the same way the old one was, with the backlit, and you're going to just be acting like you're falling down the stairs. And he's like, are you sure you don't want me to just fall down the stairs? Like, William H. Macy saw that happening and went, I will throw myself down the stairs to make your movie good.
Yeah. I get that's what Hitchcock did, but it is 1999. In 1988, I could probably do it.
I love when an actor is just so like, they're like, I see what you're saying, but you're wrong, and you're so wrong. I will injure myself to do this correctly. Like, that is so funny to me. Where it's like he's like, no, I'll just fall down the stairs. It's so funny. And it's like, yeah, that's dedication. That's how you know you got a good actor. That's like William H. Macy is one of the best actors in the game.
100%. Yeah.
He was very willing to be like, yeah, I'm falling down the stairs now. But yeah, I think that is when you are updating, remaking, rebooting, it's like you got to bring something to it.
Yeah.
And that's what Eggers, Spielberg, Jackson, they're bringing their love.
Yeah.
Their love of the original.
Yeah.
So it's not just a slavish remake. It's not Psycho where it's like, well, I can just do it exactly the same. No. And even Gus Van Sant didn't do it exactly the same. He had to bring his little touches to it.
Yeah.
And I've said it. I'm not a Gus Van Sant fan.
That's fair.
So I didn't care for his touches that he brought to it. And I could see that happening with any other filmmaker. But I think, at least in these cases that we're talking about here, even to some extent True Grit, they wanted to show you what they loved about the original. And the only way they could do that as filmmakers is to make a new film.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
And Eggers is, you mentioned The Witch. It's so funny. I think Eggers is like one of my favorite filmmakers of today.
Understandably.
And
yeah.
to such a weird point where I remember seeing The Witch in theaters, and it was a random watch for me. I think it was in the time of Movie Pass. I think I just went, I said, yeah, I'll go see this movie, whatever. So unusual for me, because even at that time, I was not as into horror films as I am now. And I don't even know if I fully I've seen it a couple of times since, because it's like, this movie's so good. This guy knew what he was doing. I didn't know it was a first-time filmmaker, whatever. I was just like, oh yeah, it's a movie about some pilgrims and a witch shows up. I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, he so masterfully tells a story and then does it. The Lighthouse was like, the gimmick there was like, look at it. Look how weird this movie looks. Like, it's shot in a square format. Like, that's so bizarre. And it's like, it's two of our greatest actors, the upcoming, Robert Pattinson and then Willem Dafoe. And it's like, yeah, shit, I got to see that. And then when Northman was just Hamlet but real, I was like, well, I'm there. What the hell? So it's like watching as he goes through all of these different things, and I'm like, this guy knows what he's doing every time.
Yeah.
So I'm like, when he says he's going to remake Nosferatu, I'm like, I'm in. There's no question here. And this is your passion project?
Yeah.
My God.
This is, as to put it, the phrase of another very popular podcast. Yeah. This was his blank check.
I think so.
But this check fucking cleared. I mean, I'm going to just see it right now.
I mean, people were amped for it. The cast. I mean, let's get into the cast.
Let's get into the cast.
because it's truly a great cast.
Mm-hmm.
And some very, some choice. Okay, I've mentioned Willem Dafoe.
Yep.
Willem Dafoe's in it.
Who don't love a good Willem Dafoe performance?
I mean, Eggers has said now that Willem Dafoe will be in every movie that he makes.
Willem Dafoe is his Michael Caine to Chris Nolan.
I mean, yeah. and from the interviews that I've seen, they love working together.
Yeah.
It is one of those things where Willem Dafoe is like, I will be in your movies as long as I live. Like he's like, I want to do this.
He's in one scene in The Northman.
Yes,
but he's so good in the one scene.
Yes. So yeah, Willem Dafoe is the equivalent of the Van Helsing, which in this film is Professor Alban Eberhard von Franz.
He is. So it doesn't keep the name. It doesn't even keep the original name. Though funny enough, his first name Alban is a homage.
Yeah.
To the producer and production designer of the 1922 Nosferatu. Yes, but he is essentially playing the Van Helsing.
Yes.
And he is, as I suspected he would be, an awesome Van Helsing.
And I love that it's one of those very, when you watch a lot of movies like you and I do, there's this thing that happens sometimes in a movie where I think the filmmaker, the scriptwriter, whoever it is, realizes, oh, we're about 30, 45 minutes in. We got to throw somebody in here that's going to rock your fucking world. And that's what they did. Like, you do not, like, Willem Dafoe shows up almost, 45 minutes in, and you're like, oh, now he's in every scene?
Yeah.
I love him, yes. Like, you meet him and you're like, oh, yeah, I get it. You held on. You didn't want to give us this guy right from the start because that was too much. You needed to get us in, show us everybody else, let us live in this world. Oh, and now the best guy has shown up.
He's one of those characters. No, that's a thing. Yeah, no, he's one of those characters that he's like, I can't give you my best ingredient yet.
Yeah.
He's got to pop up near the end of the meal.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. So then let's go through the Hutters.
Yes.
Now, this is a funny thing. Nicholas Hoult plays Thomas Hutter.
Yes.
It's so bizarre.
Oh, there's all these delight. We'll get back to the Foe's hilarious connection too.
Yeah,
but
the thing with Nicholas Hoult is he played Renfield.
That's right.
In a modern Renfield movie.
Literally a movie called Renfield.
Like not even a year before this, maybe a year
ago.
Yeah,
literally in 2023. He was in a movie called Renfield, in which hilariously, funny enough, he's playing a slight version of the Todd Browning Renfield. He even does the but if then that meant you've watched 1933 Van Helsing, Dracula, Renfield is the one we said. Renfield's the one who's at Count Dracula's house. He's the one who's having his scenes with Dracula.
Yeah.
He's the one who's having them. So in a roundabout way, he technically has done this twice.
Yeah. It's very strange. I guess he has the look. I don't know.
I want to say this. I am a Nicholas Hoult fan. I've always since About a Boy, I was a fan of this guy. I think the great thing about him is that he's got like leading man looks, but can come across as a skeeve, as a hero, as someone who's likable and you want to root for him, as someone that's despicable and you want to say what an asshole. He can do it.
Yeah,
that's why I'm very much looking forward to his Lex Luthor.
At
the end of this,
my God.
in July.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think we dodged a bullet, because did you hear who originally was casted as Thomas Hutter?
Oh, I did hear, but I don't remember who.
It was pop star.
Oh, it was Harry Styles.
Harry Styles.
Right, because as you said, Eggers wanted to make this movie. Robert Eggers wanted to make this movie way earlier in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going to bring back Anya Taylor-Joy from The Witch.
That's right.
But pair her with Harry Styles.
Mm-hmm.
That's so bizarre.
It's bizarre.
And then even, we'll just bring him. We'll bring him up now. But Bill Skarsgård was at one point going to play
he was Hutter.
Hutter.
Yeah.
But in the film, as we saw it, he plays Orlok.
Welcome back, Bill Skarsgård. By the way, you were our Pennywise,
and you were our Crow.
You are. You did bounce. You did bounce back a little. Yeah, I was seeing somebody point out, like, there's a guy I saw a video pointing out, like, sometimes you see an actor who realizes they made a stinker, and maybe not intentionally, but they seemingly are lucky to have a backup movie
Yeah.
to just make you forget about the stinker. And in this case, Bill Skarsgård, star of our ranked one of our worst remakes we watched. I won't say where. You have to listen to our Patreon. But as one of the worst remakes we saw last year was starring Bill Skarsgård as the Crow.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say all is forgiven, but I will say, because you agreed to be in the Crow, I will say I did not see Bill Skarsgård in this movie. I saw whatever the fuck this creature called Orlok is in this film.
Yeah.
That is, there is no connection between Pennywise or any other Bill Skarsgård roles I've ever seen him do. I did not see him in this movie.
That is very, I think, poignant to say. It's like people would go, oh, of course he played Pennywise, so he could play this. Like, if you look at what Orlok looks like, you're like, yeah, that's a little like Pennywise. I get it. But this is not Pennywise. This is not, I'll even go as far, this is not the 1922 Orlok.
Which is intentional, yeah.
Incredibly intentional that
Yeah.
they did something that looks creepy in its own different way. And then because it is, as people have talked, because it is, now this is a sound film, he speaks.
Yeah.
And the voice is very like crafted.
Yeah.
Like it's not his regular speaking voice. And it's not digitally altered. I'd heard that in an interview.
Yeah.
It's his voice.
Yeah.
He's doing something here he's hitting a different octave. He's adding a warble to it. Like there's a lot of stuff going on.
100%. Yeah. And he, yeah, like very, I mean, this is not hyperbole. No. Like I don't see Bill Skarsgård in this movie. I see Count Orlok. And that means he did a hell of a job with his performance, and yeah, he melted into this role. Side note, curious, are you team mustache or not team mustache?
So let me tell you, I'm sitting in the theater. We see the mustache for the first time, and the first thought in my head was, the memes are going to be out of control. I was like, the memes are going to be out of control. People are going to be posting doing all kinds of mustache comparisons. Anyone with a huge mustache, they're going to say, oh, this is Nosferatu. Like, it's going to be all, I was like, I can't believe that. I mean, Robert Eggers must have known.
Oh, yeah.
That's why
That's why they kept it out of almost all of the marketing.
Yeah.
They've insisted, do not show what he looks like.
Yeah.
Like, that was, like, number one thing. No one knew what the fuck he looked like. And everyone assumed it was because, like, oh, maybe he's so horrified.
Yeah.
That, like, they just want to wait till he shows up and we can get that reaction. Which I'm not saying that's not also the answer.
Yeah.
But also, I think, like you say, if they sniffed an out-of-box design choice, which is, in this case, a mustache. FYI, though,
Yeah.
Bram Stoker's Dracula has a mustache.
In the book, yeah.
Yeah, in the book. So, ironically, while he takes it away from her now, he slips back in more Stoker.
And I think what's also, I've been seeing, since the movies come out, there's been a lot of people where they have all the different visual representations of Dracula. And it is like, there was a Christopher Lee Dracula that had a mustache.
That's right.
There was, I guess, a Vincent Price version that had a mustache. And then if you look at the image that people use for Vlad the Impaler,
Yep.
which Vlad Tepes, which is, people say, that's Dracula's inspiration. That man's got a mustache.
That's right.
Not a big one,
No,
but it's there.
Gary Oldman's very famous Dracula is the one with the mustache,
Yeah.
So, no, I am personally team mustache.
It's huge, though.
It is a big old bushy.
And I mean, I think that's the other thing that Eggers, he has earned my trust at least. I think he's earned people's trust of,
same.
He's going to make a historically accurate film.
Yeah.
He's going to make a film where all the parts of it make sense for the time period. And I think he really put thought into it that a man of that stature and that, also, we don't exactly know how old Orlok is, but he is ancient. So it's like that he would have a mustache.
Yeah.
That is just how society worked back then. And it's like, yeah, he'd have a mustache. It
Yeah.
would be maybe a little big, and maybe it would look like that. Like
Yeah.
that's they were really trying to be like, what would this guy really look like? And that's it.
That's it.
And I like it. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah.
I'm all for it. And it does help to separate
Yes.
from her now. To me, again, it's a case of, as we're talking about, it's like it's you. Eggers clearly wants to emulate some elements of Murnau's film. That's why he's doing this. But he is his own artist. He is his own choice, and he does want to, at the end of the day, not have you think of the other two interpretations of Orlok or Dracula, whatever fucking Herzog called him. But he wants you to look at the character that's on the film, And
Yeah.
I think that it was a bold, and my brain was like, whoa, all right. Okay, I'm into it. So now, of course, like I said, Anna Taylor-Joy was originally cast as Ellen.
Yes.
But in this film is Lily Rose Depp portraying the role of Ellen in this film.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I had not seen a film with her
Mhm.
before this, and maybe I mostly agree with the world when they say, "Oh, these damn nepo babies, they're just getting jobs because their parents are famous." I can see that. I can agree with that to an extent
Yeah.
where, especially in this case where I'm like, well, I haven't seen her in anything,
Mhm.
and the things that I heard about her being in, it was like there was that one TV show that I heard was The Weeknd made. Mr. The Weeknd.
Yeah, but also it was what's his face, the guy who wrote
The
Euphoria.
guy- Euphoria. So I
which-
heard that was kind of like a weird The Weeknd vanity project.
was
So I'm
a-
like, well, I can't judge her on that. I didn't know.
Yeah.
But then it's like the other thing was that she's friends with Kevin Smith's daughter and was in some of his films.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's so like top tier nepo baby status.
Yeah. They were my first exposure to Lily Rose in movies in general was her and Harley
Yeah.
Smith were both in Tusk,
Yes.
playing essentially Canadian clerks. Then they got spun off in their own movie called Yoga Hosers.
Right.
That is definitely by far my most hated Kevin Smith movie. As a guy who grew up loving Kevin Smith, and at the end of the day, I'm kind of a supporter of the guy. I don't like that movie. I think it's generally really bad. She's fine in it, though.
Okay.
I think she's fine. My actual first exposure to her in a dramatic role, back when I was doing the film junkets, I very lucky got to do one for the movie The King. And that one I was able to interview Timothée Chalamet, like on the cusp. This is the cusp of everyone loving Timothée Chalamet. Well, I was already starting to like him a lot. So I was interviewing Timothée Chalamet, Joel Egerton, and I got Lily Rose Depp alone. And if I can pat my back on anything, I got once in a while if you talk to any of us, like we had Law, who was on a couple years ago for Muppets, Christmas Carol, I believe. You do this job as a press and junket interviewer. Your favorite moment is when you ask a question and the person goes, "No one's asked me about that yet."
Right.
And so my moment with her, there's a very good scene in The King where she has no lines of dialogue. To be fair, she's not in it a lot, so it's a very challenging movie to ask her 4 questions because she's only really in it for the last 30 minutes of the movie. But I did observe one scene where, like, Timothée Chalamet's character, he plays Henry V, and he's talking to, like, the King of France, who they just defeated in a big fight. And he's making negotiations to marry Lily Rose. And I bring up the question, the fact that, like, hey, what is your thoughts of your character? What do you think your character's thinking about when she sees this king, who's very young, probably close to your age, talking to your father as if now I'm in charge of everything? What's your thoughts of that moment? And what do you think she's thinking of here? And she's like, "You're the first person to ask me that question."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Well, hey, yay to me." And I think to me, I asked her that question because I saw what she was doing with her eyes. And I think the camera knew what, to focus on her, because it was very much like she is observing. Without saying a single line of dialogue, she is like, I'm assessing everything that this guy's doing right now. And the moment I have a silent moment with him, I'm going to ask him the fucking hardest questions. And she does that in the movie.
Mhm.
But she's like, already, you can see like her character's thinking this. She's like, okay, all right. I'm assessing the situation. And I saw that that's a very smart actor choice. I can tell that she was doing it. So I did not see this weekend television show. I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
And I know production of that was even more complicated than what was.
Yeah, I never heard good things coming out of that, so I was like...
Originally, there was a female-led production, and then it became a production that became the... Then it was taken over by the Euphoria guy, and that's when all the problematic elements started peeking out.
I will say, I mean, I think I definitely don't... Like, my brain... As much as I'm like, yeah, she's a Nepo baby, my brain does not attach her to Johnny Depp. You know, like... I'm not like, oh, I don't like her because of him. I'm like,
no,
yeah, it's so very much like I just know that she has that leg up. She's going to get into stuff because of her name.
But I will say, and I say all that about my interview with her is because I acknowledge, even though it's like, side note, they did, remember little history, little like behind the scenes of doing production, like doing that press during and stuff. They told me straight up, no questions about Johnny Depp.
I mean, yeah.
Which I totally get.
Yep.
100%. Which I'm like, looked at my coach, like, I wasn't going to anyway. That's not why I'm here. But I can tell she was good. And then, like, I watched this movie and went, okay, I was right. I really liked her in this movie.
I did too.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, she really brought it.
She really brought it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And go ahead.
It's even that thing of like, I wonder now if she will get typecast like this. It's we see it a lot, like where a young actor is new and they're just like, oh yeah, you did that, we were going to do the same thing over here and over there and the same thing here. Like I think she does have a range to her.
Yeah.
And I think this was Robert Eggers was giving her the biggest opportunity to showcase that range, and she hit all of it.
I'm nodding in my head in agreement.
Yeah,
100%.
it's like truly like they obviously expanded the Ellen character 1,000-fold from the 1922 version, where it's kind of her movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's not just the bold choice, it's the right choice. How else do you enter this film except through her, because we have to follow her journey of dealing with Orlok, dealing with what's going on in her life, and then we know the ending. And honestly, I thought they would change the ending. I really thought, I was like, this is a modern take on it. As much as I know Robert Eggers does very period historic accurate things, they're going to change it. I was like, my brain was like so ready for the ending to be different. And the fact that they kept it. Like, Ellen's story is so complete now.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
it's complete now. The thing I unpinned this from the first half. Me bringing up the fact that, like, look, it's a 1920s film, it's a silent film. Obviously, we can't explain everything, so you just have to kind of go with it. So the big go with it is, for some reason, Ellen has a connection with Orlok, and we go, okay, here, scene 1 explains the connection, or at least starts showing the connection. It
shows that she reached out, and then even if you go, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. There is a scene where they have, Willem Dafoe becomes the book. Right. Everything that they were reading from the little vampire book in the 22 version is now
Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe is like, well, yes, of course I know this because I've studied. Yeah. I'm like, yes, of course you do know. Look at you. You're Willem Dafoe. Like, come on. You know everything. But he gives the kind of explanation of, these evil beings, these demons, whatever they are in the world, they reach out to people like her. They reach out to people who have, they don't ever explain her illness, that she might have some kind of mental illness, but the way they describe it there is like she is closer to like a beast mind. Yeah. And it's like, that's what these evil things reach out because they know they can get through to them. And it's like, oh, because you're looking at like, oh, your animal nature. Like that's kind of what it's playing off of, I feel like. And to explain it that way is like, oh, that does make it even more scary. Like, because it's like, well, that could be you. Like, that could be all of us have that. So it's like so scary to think she reaches out in her mind and Orlok's just waiting and just like, oh, there she is. found you, and then never lets go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think because of that decision, like, I love that makes, because you said, like, it's the same ending as the original film, more or less. That means that Ellen does make a proactive choice in the finale. You know, she basically, you know, actively tells, you know, Defoe's character, I'm protecting Thomas.
Well, and
I'm doing this sacrifice.
It's more than even proactive. It's she is like, I brought this upon us.
That's true. Yeah.
And to stop this from happening, I must take action.
Yeah.
It's like she is owning up to like the mistake, if you want to call it, of bringing Orlok into their lives.
That's true. Yeah.
And to the city and to every, like, because it goes beyond. Yes, she loves her husband enough that she knows that this will save him.
But much like the original film, he is clearly affecting the city.
Yeah.
And again, since it sort of take place around the same time, people are assuming it's the plague, it's etc. But that's on Ellen. And that actually really, like you said, it makes this movie so much more hers. That, like, now it is a choice, a very clear choice that she's doing. And I really think that is where you take the original film and go, what can I add to make this stronger? Because we can do that now in a modern film, and that's exactly what they did.
We should talk. Aaron Taylor Johnson,
yes,
and Emma Corrin play a married couple.
Yeah.
Friedrich and Anna, and Friedrich is like he owns the dock or something. Like he's like the dock master.
Yeah.
So that's They use that to a very good point when the Demeter comes in and they have that whole scene and it's very dramatic. I really liked that angle to it. And even so, it shows, you know, the effect that Ellen can have on this couple.
Yeah,
like it's very much like she sees the effects of everything that Orlok, even if he's not physically, it's like he just starts, and then once he does get there, it's like it's all hell breaks loose.
Now these characters are not in the 1922 film, but still, even though they're kind of invented for this film, much like 1922 film, they still have Stoker equivalents.
Yeah.
So Aaron Taylor Johnson's Friedrich, which his homage, even his first name is homage to Murnau. His character is essentially based on Arthur Holmwood in the Dracula book, and Emma Corrin, their character Anna, is Lucy. Which I remember watching the 1922 film going like, oh, is there a Lucy equivalent in here? And like, not really. But they made one here for this film, which I thought was kind of cool. Again, it's because it's a remake of the original, but also they know they are essentially doing Dracula again. They're still pulling from Stoker, which I think is really cool.
And then we'll talk about Knock. Played by Simon McBurney. Simon McBurney plays Knock, our Renfield equivalent, and I mean he understood the assignment. He plays him as like so unwildy, like he just is like truly is as close to insane as possible, to the point where they put him in an insane asylum. And then I do want to mention this was an absolute treat for me. Didn't know this guy was in the movie. Ralph Ineson as the regular doctor, the first doctor that treats Ellen's what they think is wrong with her. And I was like, oh hell yeah, he showed up and I was like, oh hell yes. And then he's the guy that brings us to Willem Dafoe's Franz, and it's like, yeah, I love that. I love it. They know each other. Like they have like a little secret handshake. It's so cool.
This is also a reunion for Eggers and him, because he was, of course, in The Witch.
Yeah.
And just might as well bring it up. He will be playing Galactus in the Fantastic Four also this year. Oh, that's funny. I just realized. Nicholas Holt is Lex Luthor, and in the same month we're gonna get Ralph Ineson as Galactus.
Wow. And here
busy times.
I was like, who else do we have? Well, Willem Dafoe was Green Goblin.
Dafoe was Green Goblin. Aaron Taylor Johnson was Quicksilver.
And Craven.
And Craven.
With Skarsgård, he was in the Eternals. I don't remember his character's name. He was the villain. I think.
Was he the villain in the Eternals?
The-
he was like all CGI'd out, so I couldn't
Yes,
really...
it was not. It was just that was another all voice performance.
That's right.
Lily Rose Depp.
Crow.
There's still time.
Lily Rose, yeah, no. Look.
Emma Corrin, Wolverine
and Deadpool. That's right. They were Cassandra Nova. That's right. So Lily Rose. Don't worry.
And then Simon McBurney. We'll get him in there.
Well, no, we'll figure
We've got
this out.
time for all of you.
No, look, I guarantee you, Lily Rose will be offered at least some sort of DC or Marvel thing by the end of this year.
I fully believe it.
Yeah, no. And whether they want to do it or not is a completely different question. But but ain't nothing wrong with that little superhero money. Anyway. Anywho.
Oh, I want to talk about cats.
Okay.
Now, this is a little present in the 22 film.
Mm-hmm.
That we actually... the 22 film opens with Ellen playing with a cat.
Yes, that's right.
And what Eggers brings to this version is more cats.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it.
That's very true.
There's when Thomas is going off to work and Ellen is saying goodbye to him, a cat jumps up on the bed. And I was like, oh, how interesting. And this cat gets, probably more than one cat, but it's like the cat appears over and over as the film goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Orlok is represented by rats. I was like, when the end of the film hit, I'll just say it, the final shot is Willem Dafoe picking up a cat. It hit me fully. I was like, oh shit, he did a thing.
Yeah.
Like Eggers was doing the whole thing here of this is the cat and the rat. This is like a cat and mouse game going on between Ellen and Orlok.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that. I was like, oh, that's really smart. Like, I don't know. And then the fact that it was present in the 22 version, I was like, oh, he is fully bringing out themes that were just kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I don't know. I was just, I remember being blown away by that in the theater.
And that's one of those cases where it's such a good point. That's like one of those things where it's just like, yeah, that's where hindsight helps you out, and you can go, oh, found something,
Yeah.
found a connection, and that's super. No, that's just really cool. Again, though, stuff that they've retained, and I know this is the stuff that, like, okay, what are the things that Eggers wants to remind you of the original film? Shadows.
Yeah.
Big old shadows, and they are back full time here. Even if they're not exact recreations, he understands, like, no. The visuals of Orlok's hand and silhouette are a big part of the DNA of Nosferatu. There is a shot that echoes one of the shots of the original film, and if you looked at her Instagram account, you would see that shot of the hand over Ellen's chest. But the big one that I think is an Edgar special. The Edgar special is definitely the hands over the city.
Mm-hmm.
That is where I'm like, oh, that's where you take the visual and the theming of it and just go way bigger.
Yeah.
And just basically point out, like, Orlok has taken over the city, taken over the town. Also, I want to really point out, like, the way he shoots Moonlight is really great. Like it's blue. The bluest of blue, giving you a bit of a black and white feel, without it being fully a black and white movie, which is not. But it kind of makes you feel it. And kind of going back into Murnau's original intent of the tinted colors, that's a color choice that I think Eggers really wanted to emulate, that I thought was a very smart move.
I want to talk about, I want to just talk about, just because Nicholas Hoult is giving his all.
Yes.
Fully, and like, it's really one of those things where I was watching the way Nicholas Hoult is reacting in Orlok's castle.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, finally. Because so many other movies have this character just go, oh, that's weird, but oh well.
Yeah.
Like, he is fully like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
He turns around, he's like, oh shit. And I think even starting with let's start with him in the little camp outside of Orlok's castle. Mm-hmm. He uses, I believe we should call them Romani people, however you want to refer to them.
Sure.
But I think that's the intention there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unsettling how welcoming they are. And then once they realize, oh, you're here for Orlok, they're like, oh, no, fuck you.
Yeah.
They're like, you are not going to be doing well. Like, this is really bad.
Mhm.
And what he sees in the night, the ceremony that they perform to find a vampire in their graveyard is like, that's so unsettling.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it's even, I mean, I took that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take that to be a nightmare.
I kind of took that as that's something he experienced.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Same thing.
Because I mean, they do the cut where it goes him screaming no or whatever he screams, and then he wakes up in bed.
Mhm.
I kind of took that to be we're just jumping in time just
Right.
to make that more effective.
Right.
But I do believe he saw that, and then
I
all the
agree.
people are gone from the camp because that's what they were there to do.
Right.
And they found the vamp. I mean, he sees it, and that's where I think that's that smart way of seeding in information of like, well, that's why he thinks to do it later, to shove the spear into the coffin. He's like, I'm going to do
sure.
what they did,
Right.
because clearly that's what's going on here. I'm like, that's all very smart, and I love that. And visually, it's like incredibly creepy and unsettling.
Yeah.
The whole thing of it. And it's like, even before you get to Orlok, you see an undead vampire die. Like, that's so like, that's great. I love that. You get to throw that in there because we don't even know what Orlok looks like yet.
Right.
We don't even know what he's going to experience in that castle. But seeing that is like, oh, he's in trouble.
I want to say something about Nicholas Hoult and the way they wrote Thomas Hutter here. I think this actually might be my favorite, air quote, Jonathan Harker in film.
Uh-huh.
Going back to the scene of where he's having his dinner with Orlok, I gave Gustav a lot of credit, and I'm sure, and also Murnau's directing, that he was very good at interpreting like the fear of having to spend the night socializing with this man. Nicholas Hoult took that and went, hold my beer, and just added so much more to that same exact scene. And he is utterly terrified the entire time. Just it, and it's also kind of fun if you have seen the original film and then you see him pick up the bread and you're like, uh-oh. You're already a jittery mess before you pick that up. Now you're gonna have to pretend to, now you have to like kind of nonchalantly cut a slice. Oh man. Oh no.
There's no chance.
There's no chance. 100% no chance. But I think he is such, like, that's the thing. Harker, I joke around sometimes that John Harker can be a bit of a weenie boy, depending on interpretation. Sorry, Keanu.
Yeah.
But this one I feel like is a combination of a character that I feel like I see who he is, and I do feel like he creates enough. I have enough empathy towards him, but also, God, does he sell the terror in ways that I really, really think he stood out for me in a way that like other guys who played John Harker or John Harker types didn't. Sorry, Keanu. And again, I really, really loved what Nicholas Hoult was doing here. And it's funny. Like, if you want to see the comedic spin of what he does here, go watch Renfield.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think the terror even starts with the carriage.
Yeah.
And I think the carriage is an example of what you're saying, where it's mimicking the black and white look, light and shadow. That's what makes this carriage scene stand out so much more.
Yeah.
Than, because like you said, we've seen the Keanu version. We've seen this. We've seen that. Like, this is like, no, visually, this is so much more interesting, where Eggers is playing with the light and the dark.
Yeah.
And when that carriage shows up, and it's so like, he's like, thinks he's going to get hit by the carriage.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's stopped.
And
he has to get on. And he doesn't even know, there's no one even driving it. He's like, what is even happening?
Yeah, sorry, no Bill Skarsgård in a scarf.
I really wanted that, honestly.
I know.
That's like my biggest complaint. Is like, I wanted to see more. I wanted him creeping around more. But the entrance into the castle, I think, is the biggest like dose of that.
Yes.
Because he comes in, the door opens with no one there to open it, which is like, he's freaked out by that.
Yeah.
And then he sees Orlok in the distance, and he's like, come to me. He's like, oh shit. And then when he's falling up the stairs, and they're having a little conversation. There's the way the camera turns, and as they come around the spiral staircase, Hutter's struggling to keep up.
Yeah.
And then when he thinks he's caught up to him, he's in the room, like at the back of the room. It's like he is completely teleported, and it's like so eerie because you're like, what? Huh? How? What? And they do it again at the table when Orlok is pouring him some wine.
Yeah.
The camera is moving from like right to left, and we see Orlok is on his left, and then he's on his right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, like he's everywhere. Like you don't know where this guy is going to be next.
I gotta say, like, I think, it's funny is like a friend of mine, they texted me. Normally they're not like, oh, we're big. They're not like one of my, like you, like a big movie fan who would text me, oh, did you see this? Or whatever, we talk about this. They're not that. They like movies, but they text me because they just saw it. And they're like, I don't even like horror, but I couldn't get this out of my head. I just saw it. And I'm like, I think what's happening here is the reason people are reacting so strongly to it is the fact that at the end of the day, it's just a really well-made movie. Like what you're describing here, that's just a really well thought out sequence.
Yeah.
That's not super flashy, but that's the point. It's just strong filmmaking to just create the mood, make you freak out, make you unsuspect Orlok just as much as Hutter is. It's putting you in the space of the character, giving you an This is what good filmmaking is. And Nosferatu is a film where it understands what good filmmaking is, and people may not have all the ways of explaining why they like it or what it is they work, but it's clear it's working. A really dark, dour, not jump scary horror film, based off of a German expressionist silent film.
Well, I think
is very fascinating that how how people are reacting to it.
Calling it horror now feels so like reductive to me because what we understand as horror now is so different from the horror that this is fully referencing.
Sure.
And trying to be. It is beyond, like, people, like you said, people think of horror, they think of jump scare.
That's true.
They think of, oh, it's going to be a scary monster guy chasing them around. And it's like, no, Orlok is just there. When we do see him in his full, body, it is scary. But it isn't, the same as like a slasher movie or these, or even like look, I love him, but it's not even like a Conjuring movie. Like, it isn't a jump scare. It isn't a freak out. It is like, oh, he's there and you have to deal with him. Like, he's just there. I do think as the film goes on, it does kind of start to follow more modern horror elements. I think of especially the idea of once he gets on the boat, he kills everyone on the boat. That's just kind of, that is horror movie 101.
Right.
It's like, you're just going to kill everybody. And then once he starts killing people in the town, I think some of those scenes play more into what we know as horror now. But for the most part, this movie is playing off of, I mean, you can call it gothic horror, you can call it like a psychological horror. It is like, there are some scenes that are filled with dread, and it is Ellen and Thomas Hutter talking.
Yeah.
Orlok is not in the room, not in the country, like, it is just them two having like they're completely freaked out. And they're just as scary as some of the later scenes where it's like he's grasping onto someone and sucking their blood. Like,
right.
That kind of element is, I think people aren't expecting it because they haven't seen something like that in a while. And I think that is kind of Eggers' specialty, because The Witch played a lot with that.
Yes, true.
Like, you don't see the witch, like that. Yeah, there's a witch. There's something going on there, but it's like what's happening is people are fighting, people are misunderstanding each other to a horrific extent, and like things are going wrong.
Yeah,
that's where it's like the sense of dread and foreboding is what's really hitting on this movie, and I think most of Eggers' other movies. But yeah, it's I hopefully it's like a breath of fresh air. I think other filmmakers have done well in this zone, and movies that we love that are misunderstood as a horror is something like Crimson Peak.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's hitting on that same zone. So I think these kinds of movies exist now, but it takes a certain kind of filmmaker to nail it.
Yeah. No, agreed.
Mm.
And I think that's just kind of, maybe that's the thing. That maybe that's what's in the air. It's what people are kind of wanting, is movies like this where it's a real, like, no, we want you, look over here, pay attention, sit down, we are here to tell you a creepy bedtime story, and it's very, very, very effective. I think it's amazing what it's interesting, because I know at the end of this year we're also getting, you brought up Crimson Peak. Del Toro is bringing his new interpretation of Frankenstein, which I'm very, 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 very excited about.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's there might be, I think we're in an interesting new place of re-examining these characters, universal or not universal. It's
Del Toro's in his remake period. Is that what's happening?
I think Del Toro's in his remake period, but unlike Tim Burton, I'm liking what he's coming up with.
He is like, he's
Nightmare Alley aside.
himself.
That's all right.
I kind of did like Nightmare Alley.
It was all right.
Yeah,
it was all right. Look, I don't think it's bad. It's Del Toro, but
Yeah.
I tend to like his movies. But Pinocchio is,
Yeah.
Pinocchio, and I'm very much looking forward to Frankenstein. But no, I think here, like what we got here with Eggers is just it's such a clear vision of the type of stuff he wants to talk about. Even the more really intense stuff he does in this movie, the more sexual driven elements of the story that we always implied are in Dracula, or straight up in Dracula.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to not talk about that, and I think that's something that's kind of cool too about the Murnau film, is realizing how far they were able to get to do those same elements in a 1920s silent film is saying a lot. So I know, I think it's just I find it fascinating that he was able to still, like, he found more to explore in that stuff. I don't know. It's just Nosferatu, man.
I did really enjoy the film, but I do feel like I did miss some of, like, there's some of it in there, but it's the Orlok antics. That's all I can call it. It's like where him running around with his coffin, like him dealing with I think Orlok dealing with the world is so interesting to me, because it reaches, now when we look back on it, it feels like campy.
Yeah, sure.
But I think I was like, I wanted to see how Eggers would deal with it, because he wouldn't make it campy. Like, it would be very straight, and I thought it would work.
Mm-hmm.
And the scenes where he gets closest to doing it, I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Like everything with Hutter in the castle, I'm like, yeah, that's how a person would be reacting to this guy. Like, it's really good.
I'll give you that, and it's something that I understand if he just didn't have room for, or in his brain, his interpretation is just like, we don't really, those scenes wouldn't work with this version of the story. Yeah. And that's fine. I'm with you, though. That is, it's weird to use the word charm for the 1922 film. But in a weird way, yeah. Like, there's a reason why, like, Orlok, Shrek's Orlok is very frightening. I stand by that. Yeah. But yeah, as you pointed out, like, there is something kind of fun about the character, and seeing him kind of like, him crawling out of the cabin in the under the ship, or just sort of looking out on the dock or whatever, or just him behind a window. Like, I didn't get those shots in this movie. Yeah. Just him looking behind a window, looking at Ellen, going, no room for that here. He's got to be very sneaky, and and also, like you said, like, this Orlok is like 8 feet tall. He is huge.
I mean, Orlok is supposed to be tall, but yeah, it's like Skarsgård is tall, and I don't know what they did to him, but they made him
massive. Yeah. He is ginormous in this movie. Yeah. But still, no. I think Eggers definitely, proved his point in terms of what he wanted to retain and make. Yeah.
I think, but overall, no matter what Eggers' take on it, he was never going to make nothing evil.
Please rate and review Nothing New, a Remake podcast on your podcast app.
You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at NothingNewPod.
You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/nothingnnew.
Nothing New, a Remake podcast, is part of the Benview Network.